So the first session today will be moderated by myself. I'm Vihanga, and we have three panelists taking part in this. Visakesa Chadrasekaram, creative practitioner with multiple outlets. He's almost like a creative octopus, um, a novelist, a filmmaker, what I call an activist academic, someone who has merged the two departments in a wholesome and fruitful way, who has researched a lot around the idea of violence and conflict. He's also an advocate of human rights and minority rights. It's great to have Visakesa. He's actually a returnee into New Ink. We had him last year also in a different capacity. And joining Visakesa, we have Vishnu Vasu, an equally versatile and vivacious personality, who is a trained musician, who has a lot of exposure in different music traditions, experimenting with different music traditions in different parts of the world. But today, he's joining our program in the capacity of a filmmaker, because Vishnu has his own take on documenting some of the discussions or contributing to documenting discussions around conflict. And thirdly, we have Sarah Kabir. Sarah Kabir has also been working in areas of reconciliation, social restoration, transformation in post-conflict environments, and so on. And she published a book 2 years ago, which deals with narratives that emerge from a conflict universe, where she's focusing on stories of both military combatants and ex-LTT cadre. So this is the panel we have for our first session. To start off with, I would like to kind of bring the three diverse personalities and everyone else here onto a common space, a common page, to do with the topic that we have laid out for ourselves, breaking the silence in a post-conflict environment. I think yesterday, people who were with New Ink, we were lucky enough to be a part of the keynote address given by R. Charan. And something Charan mentioned towards the second half of his delivery, the idea of what he called creative solidarity. That kind of arrested my imagination when I was thinking of framing this discussion. From what Charan said, what I realized was that one way of working through a post-conflict situation is to see how, in a world of I would say divided loyalties, where we have multiple heritages, contested histories, even I would say mixed up vaccination priorities, how we can develop an imagination and a consciousness through which we can access a fundamental ethics, a kind of a basic agreement in reading conflict and atrocity. So that is a kind of a take-home message I took from Charan's delivery. And this I would like to tie up with something I have heard Visakesa talk about a few months ago in a YouTube-based interaction interview Visa had with Upulshantha Sannasgala in one of Sannasgala's programs, where Visa was talking about this glaring silence, especially in Sri Lanka, that surrounds difficult, I would say, historical moments of conflict. So in my understanding, Visa was referring to situations like the 1987-90 emergency. It could be the Civil War. It could be the 1971 uprise, or even the post-2009 anti-Muslim instigations we see. But the idea he was trying to socialize was that there is a silence in people in relating to these situations, which has to be broken, which has to be undermined for society to move forward. Now, these two ideas, the creative solidarity factor and the need to break this silence, I would like to tie up with several, I would say, prevalent academic positions we see in conflict related discourses. For example, there are academics who feel that counter narratives, narratives that counter dominant state narratives, uh, narratives created by nation states, have to be produced more and more, and they have to be set in circulation as much as possible in a way to balance out that silence. Then there are other scholars who feel that witness and survivor narratives coming from conflict situations have to be made into public discourses. They have to be made a part of the public domain as much as possible to balance out narratives which kind of dominate those spaces. And also, we see in more recent years that things like memory activism um, and the potential memory activism has in post-conflict environments has grown. It is expanding to attract academic interests, especially in places in the global south, places like Sri Lanka. But we also see this in other places like, I think Charan yesterday spoke about Rwanda, but also in places like Chile, Argentina, where mass atrocities have taken place. And also, fourthly, there is a kind of a new platform for potential narratives in new digital media, interactive new digital media, and new ways of representation is emerging. So I think it is this kind of juncture where we meet Visakesa, Vishnu, and Sarah in 2021, three people who are heavily in this business of, business in a non-commercial sense, in giving voice or bringing into the center people who have been marginalized in conflict narrative. So Vishnu, for example, in 2020 and 2021, he has been carrying his camera and journeying out using his own funds on his own among people in villages that were once at the heart of conflict, former war zones, meeting people he actually met maybe 20 years ago, and he's returning to them as a friend, a kind of a reunion. And this is like the premise from which some of his latest work, he released a film a couple of weeks ago, has emerged from. And then we have people like Visakesa, who I think after Pangshu in 2018, the film he produced, he's become a kind of a mainstream spotlight, right? The spotlight is on him, but he continues his activism and academic practice as a merged form of art. That's what I mentioned right at the beginning. And he's someone who advocates quite openly that, victim stories, erased or suppressed voices should be centered in so many different ways. And of course, Sarah, who joined us a few minutes ago, whose work includes, I would say, oral histories and life stories of people who have contributed or been entrenched in the same conflict, but from different positions, and how she makes investigations into their lives, the choices which may not have been equal that were available to them, and in a way tries to, overreach the kind of binary bridges, the kind of binaries, to bridge the binaries, and to give a humanized aspect to the faceless and nameless masses we kind of reduce into statistics in reports we read about conflict. So I think this is the kind of terrain which we have in front of us as we go into the discussion with these three diverse personalities, creative practitioners. So I think I will start off this discussion with Visa. Each of the panelists, I think in the first instance, we give up to 10 minutes for them to have a kind of a first move. And then after we can go into a conversation. We can answer questions that might arise. We can share ideas and move forward. So Visa, I start with you. I would like you to kind of go into your delivery, but at the outset, try to highlight for us this idea of narrative silence as you see it, as you experience it. Why, in a country that is vocal about almost everything else, why there is this glaring narrative silence when it comes to conflict. We can start there, and then after Visa, you can kind of go into your pitch.
Thank you very much, Vihanga, for that glowing introduction. When we do these things, we often don't think about how one day we're going to, our work are going to be discussed. Anyway, so let's get back to the narrative silence. I think one of the major issues in the post-conflict or even during the conflict society for us is it was heavily polarized, and it was heavily polarized in the ethnic lines, religious lines, and all sort of other lines. And this us versus them kind of binary is very, very clearly visible. And within that context, there was a group of, the entire population was divided perhaps at each time into 2 or 3 camps, and mainly 2 camps, who wanted to assert something while the others want to deny it, and then vice versa. And I think in the most recent history, the glaring silence, the worrying silence that we are experiencing is about the last leg of the war, what happened in 2009 in Nandikadal and Mullaitivu. And the numbers wise, we don't know exactly how many people would have killed in that kind of couple of weeks. It's only in that couple of weeks, not to mention the months leading towards that. And it is a very, very uncomfortable truth to come in to deal with. And the entire country is polarized and divided in this particular point. On one side, claiming these all atrocities and and demanding justice for that, and the other side in a complete silence, not only silence, in a denial, and rejecting of all the material evidence that have been compiled just to present a case. And I think so. This is why, I mean, if we look at why we are at this juncture today, I think is because we failed to have a discussion about what happened in 89, 87, 88, 89. And soon after that particular, the circle of atrocities, we just very quickly, very, very instantly, almost instantly, turned our guns to the north and east, and then suddenly everything that happened here in the south was forgotten. Now, I think the main issue, for one of the major reasons for that sort of polarized kind of contradicting versions of silence, when one party is silent, the other party is very vocal, and when the other party is silent, this party is very vocal, and so forth. I think one of the major reasons is we as artists have failed to break that silence on many occasions. Only very, very few of us manage to do that, particularly instantly. So when we were kind of shifting the focus of our war in 1989 to the north and east from the south, there was almost nothing. There was almost nothing about in the movies, in fictions, in short stories, perhaps a little bit in poetry. And then 2009 atrocities. Almost nothing, absolutely nothing. What happened to these people? Not a single fiction I can remember being written. Actually, I'm not saying putting this in the background and just kind of making passing by reference. Well, and I also did passing by reference in my fictions, but that's not what I'm meant. And just it becomes a key point of discussion in these creative pieces. And I think we are responsible partially, or if not fully, for that sort of silence. And I think we have, as creative practitioners, we have the license. We have the license to break that silence in many forms, and we have the opportunity, we have the choice to apply various sort of rather safer applications, or tools rather, to get into this discussion. I think then if you look at people like myself and those who are here, I mean, there is something, I guess, common here. I was just trying to find out actually what is happening and why have we been able to, up to certain extent, break that silence. And I very quickly point out the reasons I thought is the kind of the credibility and the civil power that we enjoy in this society because of our whatever the reasons, the qualifications or the professional, the status or whatever it is. And we are just not some nobody, I think. Let's deal with that. That's the reality. And just because I break the law and I broke the civil the censorship law once, and I could have been arrested, and I was on media claiming that I did do that, and I did perform a play which you have banned, but I was not arrested, perhaps because I was a lawyer. And so there are a number of reasons behind that. And second thing I was going to say is that our capacity to engage in this enterprise. Well, all the things that I have done, particularly the two movies, are completely out of my personal funds, very hard-earned. I didn't inherit anything from my parents or anybody. Hard-earned money. I decided I'm going to bring up children, and those children are the movies, and a lot of money has been spent on those movies, and I'm just happy to see those children growing up and going around in the world. And then also, that's not only about the finance itself, but also about the the entrepreneurial capacity that we have. Let's also deal with that. I mean, even writing a poetry and getting it published has certain element of entrepreneurial exercise. And the third thing is, I think that I think three of us, I feel that we have strong connections to the grassroots, and we are not some elite practitioners who just sit in our comfortable chairs in an air-conditioned room and wake up in the morning and decide, okay, I'm going to write a chapter or paragraph about in my new fiction. And I think we are very different, and in that sense, and that's one of the reasons that we were able to break that silence. And I think finally there is some sort of common, some sort of values that we share as something common. And I'm trying to understand what are those values. I mean, perhaps we have not articulated, but I think it is in our subconscious. And I'm trying to understand it. I think it's probably about democracy. And we deeply value that democratic ideas. We strongly support and want to protect those democratic ideas which are about justice, human rights, and minorities, the opportunities for minorities and so forth. And I think what is happening here possibly is that we ended up filling this gap rather than we have chosen our mission. Over to you, Vihanga.
All right, Visa, that's a kind of a very fruitful note to start this discussion. So just to kind of summarize three points that you brought in as means and ways of dealing with this narrative silence. I think Visa was talking about, first of all, he identified narrative is a privilege. It's not something that is equally shareable, equally shared, different parts of society, but it comes with a certain privilege. So understanding that privilege is also important for us to kind of merge in, or for us to mediate with post-conflict situations. And also he was talking about the connection with the grassroots, because sometimes the grassroots might not have the same privileges. So there can be meaningful mediations that can come with that connection, but also understanding one's own privilege. And also thirdly, the kind of shared values, the democratic ideas that society should be defended, and the defense of society is essential for society, for people to move forward. So we will hold on to some of these thoughts, but at this point I would like to kind of move on to Sarah. Sarah, who has been also, I think, as Visa pointed out, been sharing some of the ethics, some of the work approaches, which defines Visa's own artistic and activist interventions, and also someone who has tried to break through the binarized segmentation of conflict and the ownership to conflict narrative in a society like Sri Lanka. Sarah, would you like to kind of walk us through how all of this started for you, how it happened, where it has taken you, and where you are going, your journey as a mediator in this post-conflict environment?
Sure. Thank you, Vihanga. So sorry that I got late to get on. And also, I'm so honored to be on this with Visa and Vishnu. I've heard so much about the two of these panelists, and it's really an honor to be on this panel with you guys and listen to what you have to say. Yeah, so I think for me, it might be so I'm a Muslim, right? So that's one of the first places I think I need to start with in terms of saying when it comes to Sri Lanka's conflict. I think there was a third party sort of category, maybe in some senses. And also I'm of a generation where I lived through, let's say, I experienced mostly the final stages of the war. Let's say I was grown up enough at that point to understand maybe what was going on. But to answer your question, Vihanga, I think a lot of us lived a lot of a privileged life in Colombo. I personally did. And I don't think I was very much aware of what was going on in the north. And I know Visa said that, I have to say that, we have been able to, let's say, be in the grassroots, but I have to say that that's sadly, unfortunately, not something that I really lived with or, was able to grow up with, really understand what was happening in the north or the east. But as the war came to an end, and I think I was around 21, 22 years old at that time, that is when things hit me, where I was in uni, I was overseas as well. That's how much of privilege maybe I was having at the time, to be really disconnected from what was going on. I had, very little experience of the war. And that's when I asked myself what was going on. And I felt that I needed to use this privilege to do something good. Yeah, that's when I thought, without staying disconnected, maybe we need to find a way to use our voice to go and maybe, I need to say but when I say use my voice, what I thought is there were a lot of sound coming from Colombo about the conflict at final stages, at the end of the war, post-conflict. And I think there was a lot of good work being done in the sense of we were hearing the voices of victims. We were hearing the voices of, let's say, war widows, families who had lost loved ones. But one of the things we hadn't really experienced, I think, was we hadn't heard the voices of combatants, people who had first-hand experience from the war. We had a military version of the end of the conflict. And I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to know what had happened, to be honest. And that's where it started for me, because I felt that I had lived a very privileged life where I had no idea what was going on. Um, and those questions that arose as a young girl, I guess, is what took me to the north and got me to dig up and start talking to people and start listening and hearing their experiences. And I wanted to then not give my version of it, because I'd heard a lot of translating in that sense, where we go and we listen to a story and we come back and we give our version of what we want to say. So I thought, let's try to create a space where I can share actually their words, so they are able to share their experiences in some way which maybe they haven't had the opportunity to. So that's kind of where I came from in doing it. And I think in terms of talking about the silencing of voices, the silencing of conflict, we've seen that happen in Sri Lanka since during the final stages, let's say, and also post-conflict. But I also think one of the things that we need to talk about is not just the erasure of memories of the conflict, but also the root causes. I think that's one of the biggest problems I personally feel working in reconciliation, that we see these repetitions of discrimination, we see these repetitions of ignorance and violence, majority versus minority, happening because as in Sri Lanka, we're not taught about our history. We're not taught about what happened since independence. Our schools completely erase this from the history curriculum. And I think that is a huge issue, because we are depriving the younger generations of lessons that can be learned. For whatever reason, Sri Lanka, we don't talk about the Sinhala Only Act. We don't talk about standardization. We don't talk about Black July even. I mean, these are big, big things in Sri Lanka that need to be spoken about, need to be apologized for certain things. But we don't see that. And for me, I think though it's 70 years earlier, we're talking about, and if we don't start talking about those things soon, it's going to be completely erased. And it really, really scares me. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the points I wanted to make in terms of silencing. To reiterate something that Visa was saying, I think in some ways, what he was saying, I think we need to also understand that we have privilege in some senses, and we need to be able to find ways and spaces that we can share the voices of people who have really been affected in a way that we don't skew what they're saying to maybe prove what a version that we have in our heads. And at the same time, like you said, I did try very hard in the book that I did to balance both sides. But I'm learning as I grow older, and I'm learning that this attempt for neutrality, attempt for balance, is not as easy as we think. In some places you have to give more weight for certain communities than others, because maybe they were affected more, maybe they were the perpetrators more than the others. So yeah, maybe I'm sometimes forcing a balance is also a new thing that I'm learning as we go on. I'm hoping to learn from people like yourselves as well. Yeah, Lisa, I think sorry, Vihanga, that I think that's maybe as much as I wanted to say right now.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, actually, some of the points you made resonated with some ideas shared with us by Charan yesterday evening, especially when you spoke about the privilege that you saw, guiding you in some of your formative years, and you having to step out of that, take a step back. I think this also, at some level, it resonates with this idea of creative solidarity, because creative solidarity is about how you negotiate with the differences you share with a community, or a community you are concerned with or empathize with, and trying to redirect or renavigate yourself within that space. And also the point you made about how some, I would say, defining moments or era changing moments of our recent history, how it is erased, suppressed, deselected, whatever the word might be. Because Charan was talking about how memory is very easily lost. The example he brought out was, I think, related to the burning of Jaffna Library in 1981, where some people remember it as the night of May 31st, but how it happened on June 1st. Now, that is something I won't forget because my birthday is June 1st, but that's a different thing. Actually, there are many people that I have met who think that the Jaffna Library was burnt in 1983. So they don't even connect that there was a riot prior to this, prior to 1983. So I think these are very important discussions when we try to center marginalized narratives or marginalized representations of key historical moments that shapes our present and our future. But let's come back to this in due course, right? Move on to Vishnu for a few minutes. Vishnu, whose latest film, as some of us know, came out a couple of weeks ago, and whose latest film, in my appreciation, is a little bit more than exactly giving voice and representation to a marginal community. I felt that Vishnu was trying to transcend to a different zone altogether, where there was a lot of emotion which was represented in the film, not only the community he was looking at, but also himself as the mediator, the interventionist. Because in my understanding, Vishnu, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were going back to a people you knew at a different point of Sri Lanka's civil war, going back to villages which were in the periphery of the war zone, so-called border villages. That is the word they use, and where he was going back as a friend, paying a courtesy call after so many years and making a film out of it. So emotions play a big role, and sometimes, as I mentioned at the outset, emotions is something we forget altogether when we discuss conflict. Vishnu, would you like to take us through what this film meant to you, what that journey was all about, and maybe continue from there, whatever you want to add?
Vihanga, to begin with, my childhood was a misery. In fact, I never had a childhood. So shifting my focus as often as Russian weather, I was aimless. So when I grew up, all I wanted was to gain love, to find a father figure who would love me the most, and basically to regain the lost childhood. So in my quest, I realized I am not alone. There are many million children in the world, in Sri Lanka. There are many hundreds of thousands of children are like looking for father figures. So what I did was I started visiting refugee camps during the thick of the war. For 20 long years, that's what I was doing. And I visited refugee camps and I started working with little children. And these children, I visited camps in Batiklo, in Trincomalee, in Vavuniya, to tell you that I don't speak Tamil. I can't. I mean, then now I can sort of speak a couple of sentences, but like by the time I visited these camps, I didn't know the word in Tamil. But I still work with these people. I understood the emotions of these people. So that's how this emotional journey started. And then during the war, I decided that I am not going to stay in Colombo, that I'm going to relocate myself either in the north or east. But unfortunately, north was closed for us for a very longer period. So I went up to Vavuniya and I lived in that area. So the Kabitigol level, Vihara Halmi level, Yaka level, these places became my hometown kind of. And also I went to Batiklo because Batiklo was accessible. So in those areas, like majority of them were like in the Vavuniya area, I work with Sinhalese people. And I decided, like they say the war is over, I don't know whether that's really true. So I decided to visit these places once again. I did visit them with no idea of making a film or writing a story. But as a practice, I carried my camera in my backpack. So when I went to the Yakaveva village, that was my first stop after 20 years. Yakaveva is where there was a bomb blast and 69 people from the one same family died on the spot. So I was talking to people in Yakaveva. I find out that some of them are still living with this dependent mentality. But there are people who are willing to forgive. And so I thought, all right, I am going to meet people who think differently. I mean, having gone through so much trauma during the war, and if they can forgive someone, the perpetrators, there's some story into that. So I met this mother, Nandavati Amma. When I spoke to her, she said, my husband was abducted on the 20th of March 1994, and he was killed on the 26th. I got to know that only in the Vavuniya courts. And from the day one, I realized this is a karma that I have committed. This is a collective karma that we have committed, my 3 children and myself and my husband. So if I start hating them, this karma will come back to me in my births to follow. So I might as well forgive them. I am a practitioner of Buddha's teaching, so I might as well forgive them and go alone. So this story, I thought it's a story that I must break my silence with, because everyone is still focusing on the war and the atrocities and how many people died and the injustices. Yes, I am all for. I also want to, I made a film soon after the war titled Butterfly. It's about child soldiers of Sri Lanka. And but this time I thought, no, it's a time has come that we must approach people with a different message. The message of forgiveness, message of love, message of compassion, karuna. So that's why I thought, like, I better do this film. And this is the Amma. My film is titled Amma, Mother. This film is all about forgiveness. So I'm approaching the silence in a different perspective altogether. And I'm also writing the oral history of border village, women of border villages. Once again, like, my focus at the same time, what they went through, but their transition, how they transcended themselves from such trauma to a very serene plateau.
Thank you, Vishnu. That's a kind of a very, I would say, a fruitful insight for anyone who is interested or following through with your work. And my understanding is the film is not yet publicly distributed, but hopefully it will come to a point where we can have this in our living room, so to speak. And I think that point you brought about centering or externalizing our emotions and making it a part of that creative sharing process is very important, because one thing I see, especially the kind of conflict narratives that traditionally come from a place like Sri Lanka, you try to move away from the subjectivities involved, which actually undermines any kind of reconciliation, because without emotions, without feelings, without actually having ourself in the discussion, you can't have any kind of forward thinking, progressive movement. That is how I see it. In the discussion, we have about 15 minutes left. So I think at this point, I would like to go to a kind of a semi-structured question-led interaction, unless some of the panelists would like to comment on the points shared by one another. Anything you would like to add at this point? If not, we can go to a little bit of chit chat based on a few thematic drives. Visa, Sarah, and Vishnu, anything you want to add at this point?
There is nothing particular to add, and but just one little thing actually. I had the rare opportunity of meeting that the Nandavati whom you were referring to. So yeah, and I was just thinking, and then her what she says is something relates to the character in Panchu film as well. So I mean, even in different contexts, we seem to be revolving around same people, same themes, and same mindset as well. Just that's all I want to say.
Oh, wow. I must tell you that actually after meeting, I mean, in any case, I live a very simple life. But I must tell you that after meeting Nandavati, my own thinking pattern has taken a different route actually. So I now think like, I mean, I am somewhat privileged now. I mean, I live a comfortable life. But I'm thinking all the time, like if Nandavati, after having gone through all these trauma, and she still lives in a small house with minimal facilities, her toilet is 100 meters away from the house, and I mean, having gone through and going through all this, if she can change, I mean, if she can be, I mean, I believe that Nandavati has become, I mean, she has attained nirvana already. So there is a transformation in my life actually after listening to Nandavati, because I have started looking at things from a very compassionate, very loving perspective, through a very, very loving window. I have become more lovable, I must say, after listening to Nandavati Amma's stories.
A quick one to Sarah, especially because I identify Sarah's work having a very strong root with education, or the direction in which education has to move in Sri Lanka. This is just to kind of tease your brain, Sarah, because most of the stuff you say makes a lot of sense. It has to definitely come into how we reorient our imagination going forward from here. I would say the next decade. It's a very crucial decade for Sri Lanka where reconciliation practice is concerned. But the question I have for you, you don't have to go into detail, is how do you see Sri Lankan education having to change to register the kind of narratives, the kind of discourses you work with? A couple of pointers would do.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is to say that our history curriculum is the key, I think. In Sri Lanka's education system, our history curriculum really needs to be changed. I mean, I was in a local school, I studied in Sinhala medium, and we are taught, I mean, even until independence, everything that we're taught is very one-sided. You're given a particular narrative. I mean, the famous is the Dudugamanu Elara story, right? Like Elara is painted from the start in our mindsets so Tamils are invaders, and that's the time of the conflict that you're learning this as students, right? So it's so easy how that's then imported into not just the LTT but Tamils in general, right? That these are invaders. You don't start to think of why did they ever want to take up arms in the first place? Why would they want a separate state? All we're taught is LTT, the Tamils just want a separate state. So yeah, when it comes to the education, I think our history curriculum needs to teach everything that happened from independence onwards to children, because if we don't, we are going down a dangerous path of starting to discriminate different communities. I'm not justifying violence, but if we push people, if you continue to push people into corners, it's very hard to expect them to figure out different solutions apart from taking up an arm, especially if they are young, if it's easy to brainwash people who are young, and it's easy when there are discriminatory policies going on, right? So that's one thing. And I think what Visa or Vishnu were mentioning, the sensitivity, I don't know, there's a lack of sensitivity in our not just in our education system completely. Like it's very rigid. You're taught. There's a lack of emotion, and I feel like you know, Vishnu was saying after he met Nandavati, is how he, even for me, after meeting certain people, you have to have this sort of, maybe they're not, it's not first-hand experience in that sense, but at least there needs to be an experience for children inculcated where they're able to build up sympathy, able to build up emotions in what they're trying to even learn, rather than it be, you know, this sort of very rigid structure. In Sri Lanka, I feel like if you notice nowadays, I mean, people are like anything can happen. I mean, this recent Valigama incident of that man being killed and all, like there's a lot of, I don't know, silence in Sri Lankan community in general. And I feel this is largely by our education system. If we can change that and get children to feel that they can be active, engaged citizens, that you can actually make a change by using your voice, you know, you don't have to always follow this structured, regimented system. But yeah, I mean, yeah, those are maybe a few things I can
Yeah.
say.
So from what Sarah says, what I realize is that we're actually kind of acting against a very strong agency that has been
Yes.
shaping post-independence thinking, which in a
Yes.
word is the state. And the kind of nation building the Sri Lankan state has been engaged in is not exactly kind to memory. It is more kind towards a state-centric, all-encompassing monolith, which we call history. So that is what we have to fight against. Now, Visa, yeah.
Just to say also, you know, when it comes to Sri Lanka's past and the conflict, everything, I think we have in our culture a sense of lajja. Like it's a shame to talk about our past for some reason. I feel like maybe that's in our culture. Even if a small mistake we have done personally, we just want to bury it, right? I think that also adds to the silencing that happens, where we think that if we bring up something wrong that we did, we're trying to shame our country. And then people don't accept, like if we try to say like, look, we need to apologize for burning of Jaffna Library, we need to apologize for Black July, nobody wants to, because acknowledging it seems like they think that it's going to bring the country down. But I think there needs to be a change in understanding. Acknowledging and apologizing is actually going to take us much further ahead. Yeah.
So I think we have time for three questions, and I would like to pose one to Visa, especially because Visa, in his opening statement, he spoke about silencing and censorship, I would say, that surrounds the artist and the artist's relentless struggle or negotiation with those factors. Now, Visa, you have been in the business for over 20 years, working in multiple genres. And I think I would be iterating something that is in the minds of most of your fans and followers. How does fiction, how does fact feature in your creative practice? What part of it is fiction? What part of it is fact? How do you play with these two cousins in creating what you create?
And and then I would like to add one more cousin, and that is the magic, because magic is something away from fiction. So fiction is something convincible. Magic is, oh, is it or not? I think actually it is. There are certain things are tabooed to be presented in the text form or otherwise, particularly in the text. I mean, yeah, anyway. But in the text form, we have so much freedom to apply and just bring those cousins together. And I really like that aspect. And also, it's most of the time it's not that consciously I'm doing it because I have a fantasy, and I think we all have a fantasy to see we all moving out of this pit and getting out of this and just moving forward, and nobody is left behind. And if you want to achieve that fantasy, that's not going to be possible only with facts, and that is also not going to be possible only with fiction, and that's not going to be possible with either. But we need magic as well, and that, I mean, magic means, I'm just talking about magic realistic writing styles. And I think perhaps that's what we want, and more of us have to have built those fantasies around our creations, and then people who read them just think at one stage, hang on, it may be possible. It could be possible that one day we're going to have democracy, one day we're going to have equality, one day we're going to have prosperity without just destroying this planet and this island. And I think that is the purpose of bringing the three cousins together for me. Rather than a purpose, it's just it happens naturally, spontaneously.
Yeah, so Sarah speaking from an education policy perspective, and Visa from a, I would say, creative activist perspective. Vishnu, someone who kind of embodies both of this and tries to take it to the next level. Vishnu, I would like to ask you this because largely you work in interactive digital kind of media. What do you see is the role of the kind of digital media culture that we have with us? Short films, which can be distributed through YouTube, films that can be shot through cameras, handheld cameras, phone cameras. What do you think is the role these kind of new interactive digital media has in taking these discussions forward? Do you see any kind of positive?
I think, in a way, yes, we have to discuss, as Sarah mentioned, like we have to focus on our history without the shame. We must be vocal about our history. As Visha said, we have to merge the two cousins and also include the third cousin, the magic. My thing is, to me, simply, whatever the work that we project now, the stories must be woven around love, compassion, forgiveness, equanimity. That's the only way that we can move forward. Because I'll give you an example. Like, my nephew passed away. He suffered he passed away not even a month ago, owing to COVID. And he had to undergo terrible treatment at 4 different treatment centers. And he died due to medical negligence. And I wrote a small piece. And it was well received in the first couple of hours. And then suddenly I got a telephone call from a minister's somebody. And he said, "What is this? Is this true?" And then I said, "Yes." And then followed barrage of thousands of Facebook posts which even insulted my dead nephew. We have come to a point where respect and love and emotions we are in a place minus emotions. People don't even feel that, this man is dead. We should not sort of insult a dead person. So in a space like that, I think the only way we can sow seeds is the seeds of love, compassion, karuna. For me, karuna is my name. I am actually planning a series of discussions based on these metta, karuna, mudita, and upeka. That's how I see how we can move forward.
I think for a meeting of this nature, 1 hour in this kind of platform, I think we came far. But I think this is also a discussion we shouldn't stop at this point, take forward. And I really hope that is what we will do. Sarah, Visa, Vishnu, and also others who have joined us as a part of New Ink today to be a part of this discussion on breaking silences. Sadly, this is the kind of formal time we can accommodate this particular session. My take-home message here is that silence has to be broken, but it has to be broken with an understanding who we are, what kind of privileges we have, what kind of interventions we can make on behalf of people who might not have those privileges, how education and policy has to be empowered in a transformative way to give way for new imaginations for the society to move ahead. And taking from Vishnu, the need to humanize, to bring in emotion into discussions that will actually facilitate meaningful and far-reaching reconciliation. A big thank you, Sarah, Visa, and Vishnu from the New Ink team for joining us Saturday morning. I think our next hour is dedicated to a set of readings from 3 engaging writers. And this next session will be moderated by Tinaz Amit. So I think at this point, I would like to take a step back. Let Tinaz carry things forward.